times in
Inside for early.
Okay. All right. I was curious where we're going to be when we start our session. Today we are on our final week of Till We Have Faces, and we almost finished in our discussion. So I want to kind of wrap up the very end of the book, and then I want us to have a little bit of conversation about, there are so many themes and things that this pokes at, pulls out, and so we'll kind of see which direction it goes. But last time we'd gotten through her trial, or her complaint against the gods. She then meets her father, she meets the fox, and she had just gotten to the point where she sees the mural with the pictures, and I think we stopped right at that point. And so to just kind of quickly, have people all finished the book now? Mm-hmm. Not yet? Okay. Well, it'll spoil a little, but I think it'll help as you read through, because again,
it has helped actually.
It's that especially this latter part where it's dreamlike, and sometimes even the different times I've read through it, I pick up more and more. Let us begin. When she begins to look at the wall and see the story, the first thing she sees is what she thinks she remembers as her going to the river and her tying her feet, but then something shocks her when she looks more closely. She looks and she says, that looks like Psyche, right? Mm-hmm. And remember when that scene happens to her a couple chapters back, what stops her from carrying it out?
A voice, right?
Yeah.
A voice. And what did she say about the voice? Do you remember this?
That she thought it was the God.
Yeah, it was the voice of a God. She said, you just know it. Like once you've heard it, you can tell the difference between a person acting like a God and a God. And so she's looking and she's seeing this transpire on this like moving mural. She screams out, stop, don't do it. And you realize, right, at first it just struck me the first time through before I finished that it was interesting, like how these worlds and stories are interwoven, but I'd lost the fact in my head that she has that part, that she knew it was the voice of a God, which was one as you're going through this. For me, the first time reading through, this was the most complicated part where I'm trying to figure out what is going on here and who's who, because it's like she sees Psyche, but then wait, no, Psyche was that one, and you're trying to figure out what's really going on. So that's part one. She then begins to see from that point all these different aspects of her own journey, which is the myth being retold. So she ends up seeing the rams, and she ends up seeing the seeds being sorted. But she keeps seeing Psyche doing it, and she's saying that, and Psyche seems even more beautiful than I remembered her. And then in the end, she sees Psyche on this journey to the underworld, and all the people that are trying to dissuade her, distract her, and stop her from this journey. And I just want to share one part from that, where there's the fox saying, this is silly and it's superstitious and don't keep going, right? And then it's all the crowds of the people in the town saying, stay with us, you're the goddess, like don't leave us. And then to that horrible scene that we talked about last time that you said was the part that made you almost want to stop reading the book, right? she talks about seeing then a woman who held out her hand to Psyche, and I saw that her left arm dripped with blood. Then came her voice, and what a voice it was, so deep yet so womanlike, so full of passion. It would have moved you even if it spoke happy or careless things. But now, who could resist it? It would have broken a heart of iron. And she keeps telling her, come back to the old world. So Psyche bit her lip, the blood came and wept bitterly. I thought she felt more grief than that wailing Orwell. But that Orwell had only to suffer. Psyche had to keep on her way as well. She kept on, went on out of sight, journeying always further into death. That was the last of the pictures. The fox and I were alone again. Did we really do these things to her? I asked. Yes, all here is true. And we said we loved her. And we did. She had no more dangerous enemies than us. And in that far distant day when the gods become wholly beautiful, or we at last are shown how beautiful they always were, this will happen more and more. For mortals, as you said, will become more and more jealous. And mother and wife and child and friend will all be in league to keep a soul from being united with the divine nature. And Psyche, in that old terrible time when I thought her cruel, she suffered more than I, perhaps. She bore much for you then. You have borne some for her since. This idea that, and again, Lewis's one of his main purposes about explaining these loves and what's true love and what is perverted love and what's love turned upside down. When we read through this story the first time, we are seeing our narrator as someone that we see as pure of heart, who's doing the loving thing on behalf of the sister. When we get take two, we realize that that love is actually selfish, manipulative, controlling, and it is trying actually to reroute her destination from being fully drawn into the life of the gods versus being a person trying to help her, support her, show her the right way. So let me just ask, there's this reality of the story that you say, okay, I see that. Have you experienced, or when you read that, is there anything in your own experience as we think about life in the world, as we think about life of faith, as we think about those we love and those who love us? Does anything resonate with that? Or does it feel more like something that I understand it within the literature, I understand it as a theme in the story, but do we ever find that those who love us, maybe rightly, maybe wrongly, are actually distractions, diversions, roadblocks to the life and the journey God's calling us to? And that's heavy, so that's probably should have eased into that question, but. Which is weird that we're talking about this on Palm Sunday, but.
I think the reason that one scene was caused me so much angst is I've seen that play out in real life with friends, and even though you try to guide them and try to get them out of those manipulative relationships, you have to be able to step back and let people have their own journey.
Yeah. And
that's where I just kept, it was like, that's why it caused me so much angst.
Yeah.
This reminds me of a Blake poem that when we read, we actually tie it back to the book, but it's called The Clod and the Pebble. Do you know that poem?
Oh, I don't.
It's very short. If
Yeah.
me, can I read
The
it?
what in the pebble?
The Clod and the
See,
Pebble.
Oh, okay.
First stanza is a quote. Love seeketh not itself to please, nor for itself hath any care, but for another gives its ease, and builds a heaven in hell's despair. So sung a little clod of clay, trodden at the cattle's feet. But a pebble of the brook warbled out, these meters meet, and this is the pebble's response. Love seeketh only self to please, to bind another to its delight, joys in another's loss of ease, and builds a hell in heaven's despite. This is from Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience, and this is one of his songs of experience, of his idea that love, rather than being selfless when it's, I want to say, marred by human interference, becomes a very selfish thing, which is exactly what Orwell thinks that her love for Psyche is. She thinks that it's selfless and only comes to realize how selfish she is.
Maybe none of us is actually capable of completely selfless love.
I would agree, yeah.
You know, I mean, maybe that's what that poem says, that, you know.
The easiest person
Jesus.
to love is the one that loves you back. And if they don't love you back, you don't love them. You know,
Yeah.
We love because it makes us feel good.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're just not capable. We can't take what we want and need, even if we're not doing it consciously, out of the equation. You know, just like a baby thinks only of itself because it's totally dependent, you know, for survival. Maybe we never grew out of that.
I actually think animals can do that better than humans. Dogs, you know. But even then, you know, there are
Thousands of
motivations
years
for
of
dogs,
genetic
but
engineering.
yeah,
That's what's done that
but
development.
that's, I think, more pure love than what at least what I'm
Dogs can do
capable
it,
of.
cats no. Dogs.
Depending. Yeah.
One of those things that you know as a person who's lived a while is a true statement on one level, but it still bothers me every time it's said. At school, we have for graduation in grades 9 to 12, you do 120 service hours. And the hope is that students in that rhythm, right, of serving others realize, like, this is what God's made us to be and to do, and this just becomes part of the rhythm of their life. And so sometimes, like in a chapel, students will go and serve somewhere, and we'll have them like share like about what they did and what it was like, and they often say this thing, which again I would agree with, where they say, you know, you go to do it because sometimes they'll like say because, you know, a requirement, but you do it to help somebody else, but in the end, it makes you feel really good to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's kind of this like, so do it so you can feel good. And it's like, well, just like, I don't think that's really what service is, but right, it's like a better drug, right? You feel great when you do this, but it is true, right? Because it's who we're ultimately made to be, but that we're being driven, as Lewis said, right? There's that need love, and then there's that gift love. And again, it's great that we're providentially, on no level was it my planning, but that we're ending this as we are beginning Holy Week, where you have the perfect story of the person whose love is ultimately gift love, who is emptying and suffering and dying on behalf of others, but whose whole message was about this very thing. That really makes no sense to us until we get so drawn into what Lewis would call the God life that we start to change. Because all these people thought they were right in step with Jesus until he starts saying things like, you know, turn the other cheek, you know, love your enemies, pray for them, bless those who curse you. When the soldiers oppress you and like make you carry their stuff a mile, go the extra mile just out of your love and goodness. He's pressing this message that says our love should be poured out for people, not for what we get out of it, but because that's how I loved you. And to the point, as we're kind of going like, I don't think that's humanly possible. Which is what makes this story great, because I think Lewis would agree. Any other comments before we?
I have a comment.
Yeah.
I think you can get caught up in feeling like bad about being human, but I believe God made us that way. We're biologically conditioned to, when we do something good, we have oxytocin that goes through our bloodstream and makes you feel good. And I think we're designed in that way to need each other and to come into community. And
I agree.
mean, it's like, you don't have to feel bad because we're human and we can't love purely, because God made us this way.
Yes. But at the same time, our story tells us that because of the fall, there's something broken and not right that has to be fixed. So it's like the wiring's there, that of course it should feel good to do the right thing, but because of our human fallenness, it has that tendency to devolve towards, but I'm gonna actually use it to control, to manipulate, to benefit myself.
Yeah.
Which is what, as it moves forward in this though, we see the very thing we're talking about, because what the beautiful surprise of this story is that Orwell has no idea of who she's becoming in this process. The Orwell who manipulates and tries to control her sister, who is ugly of face so that she hides it, does not realize the person that she in the end becomes. Because the great surprise is that right after this, let me just read this one thing at the end of, because I think this fits what we just said. They say, but even I, who am dead, do not yet understand more than a few broken words of their language. He's talking about the gods. Only this I know. This age of ours will one day be the distant past, and the divine nature can change the past. Nothing is yet in its true form. And again, and this is good Lewis and his kind of Neoplatonism, this Platonic view that says everything in this world is shadow, but it's being transformed into the ideal. And so if you've read through all the Narnia Chronicles, in the last battle, the final book, when it all goes wild in the end, and Emmett finds himself in a new world that's bigger, brighter, more beautiful, and then he's like, but it seems familiar somehow, and he realizes, just wait, this is Narnia, it's just the true Narnia. And it's more beautiful, and it's more solid, and it's more all these things we could have never thought, because the way Lewis sees our life and the life of God is that we live in shadows and reflections and broken, limited conceptions of the real and the ideal, but it's only in God and in completion that we become what we're supposed to be. And so in this, he's saying, nothing's in its true form yet. It'll become something else, which is then at this very moment when Psyche comes back and she sees her and she's like a goddess. And she says, and she's kissing her feet, and it's like everything just got brighter. O Psyche, O goddess, I said, never again will I call you mine, but all there is of me shall be yours. Alas, you know now what it's worth. I never wished you well, never had one selfless thought of you. I was a craver. But what does she do? She bends down, she lifts her up, and she stands there, she's crying. And she says at this point, and yet, this is hard to say, with all of this, even because of all this, she was the old Psyche still, 1,000 times more her very self than she had been before the offering. For all that had then but flashed out in a glance or a gesture, all that one meant most when one spoke her name, was now wholly present, not to be gathered up from hints nor in shreds, not some of it in one moment and some in another. Goddess, I had never seen a real woman before. So she's calling her a goddess. And when she spoke earlier, when she was at the river and said, oh, I heard the voice of a goddess, and now we realize, just wait, that was her own voice? She ends up saying, this actually isn't a goddess. I'd never seen what a real woman was before. Because she's seeing her in the ideal, and it was like the thing that we'd call a goddess, which Lewis is hinting at, and this is in his Great Divorce, which maybe we should read next. It's like, this is what real humanity was supposed to be like. It's that we're marred in this broken life and world and experience. And so they're talking and said, and then let me just read this last part, because here's where it shifts. Joy silenced me, and I thought I had now come to the highest and the most fullness of being which the human soul can contain. But now, what was this? You have seen the torches grow pale when men open the shutters and broad summer morning shines in on the feasting hall? So now, suddenly, from a strange look in Psyche's face, I could see she knew something she had not spoken of. Or from a glorious and awful deepening of the blue sky above us, or from the deep breath like a sigh uttered all around by invisible lips, or from deep, doubtful quaking and surmise in my own heart, I knew that all this was only a preparation. Some far greater matter was upon us. The voices spoke again, but not loud this time. They were awed and trembled. He is coming, they said. The God is coming into his house. The God comes to judge Orual. If Psyche had not held me by the hand, I should have sunk down. She had brought me now to the very edge of the pool. The air was growing brighter and brighter about us, as if something had set it on fire. Each breath I drew let into me new terror, joy, overpowering sweetness. I was pierced through and through with the arrows of it. I was being unmade. I was no one. But that's little to say. Rather, Psyche herself, in a matter, no one. I loved her as I would have once thought it impossible to love, would have died any death for her, and yet it was not now, she that really counted. Or if she counted, and oh, gloriously she did, it was for another's sake. The earth, the stars and sun, all that was or will be existed for his sake. And he was coming. The most dreadful, the most beautiful, the only dread and beauty there is was coming. The pillars on the far side of the pool flushed with his approach. I cast down my eyes. Two figures, reflections, their feet to Psyche's feet and mine, stood head downward in the water. But whose were they? Two Psyches, the one clothed, the other naked? Yes, both Psyches, both beautiful, if that mattered now, beyond all imagining, yet not exactly the same. You also are Psyche, came a great voice. I looked up then, and it's strange that I dared. But I saw no god, no pillared court. I was in the palace gardens, my foolish book in my hand, the vision to the eye had, I think, faded one moment before the oracle to the ear, for the words were still sounding. That was 4 days ago. They found me lying on the grass, and I had no speech for many hours.
Who's the he?
It's the God.
Okay.
It's the God that, if we go all the way back, that she thought was the shadow brute that you should never look at.
Oh, that guy. Okay.
And he comes back, and he's of all beauty and all power and all glory, and he looks at her and he says, you too are Psyche, which makes sense of these vision she's seeing of this, wait, is that Psyche? I thought that part was me, but that's even a more beautiful Psyche. I didn't remember she was so beautiful. And remember, the word Psyche in Greek is soul. And it's this picture of she's being made beautiful and whole, but because she's lived her life with a face that's covered, she doesn't realize it. And we get that one glimmer, which we don't understand at the time, when she finally takes up her veil in front of Bardia's wife, and the look on her face. And she just interprets it because she says, I see you loved him too. But there's this, again, it's the appearance versus reality. It's the face and who we hide and what we're seen to be and who we're not. But in this moment, she totally sees who she's become and who she's made to be. Not because of herself, but because of Psyche and because of the God. And she comes to the very end. And remember, I'm going to jump back and just parallel two passages real quickly. When we begin part 2 and we get to her trial, remember what she says. In that famous passage where she says about the complaint was the answer. Remember, she went on and on to the gods. The complaint was the answer. And he tells the line about, hey, say what you mean. When the time comes to you at which you will be forced at last to utter the speech which has lain at the center of your soul for years, which you have all that time, idiot-like, been saying over and over, you'll not talk about joy of words. I saw well why the gods do not speak to us openly, nor let us answer, till that word can be dug out of us. Why should they hear the babble that we think we mean? How can they meet us face to face till we have faces? And it's in this moment where she realizes the face she has as the God speaks to her and says, you are Psyche. And then the next thing she knows is she goes to look to the God, right? There's always this idea you can't see gods and live. And she goes to look to the God, she's shocked, she looks, and then she wakes up, basically on her deathbed, back where she started. But here's how she ends. And she says, they tell her she's about to die. She says, I ended my first book with the words, no answer. I know now, Lord, why you utter no answer. You are yourself the answer. Before your face, questions die away. What other answer would suffice? Only words, to be led out to battle against other words. Long did I hate you, long did I fear you. I might. And then it ends. And it tells us, I, Arnum, priest of Aphrodite, saved this roll and put it in the temple. From the markings after the word might, we think that the queen's head must have fallen forward on them as she died, and we cannot read them. This book was all written by Queen Aurowal of Glome, who was the most wise, most valiant, fortunate, and merciful of all the princes known in our parts of the world. If any stranger who intends the journey to Greece finds this book, let him take it to Greece with him, for that is what she seems mostly to have desired. The priest who comes after me has it in charge to give up the book to any stranger who will take an oath to bring it into Greece. Because remember, when the book was a complaint about how bad these gods are, she goes, take it to Greece so they read it and hear the word. And now, it's like, take this story so everyone can read it. And I, in a bad way, the way it closes, I think of that inappropriate scene in Holy Grail where the guy's writing on the wall. And, she says, seeing, experience the God. That's the answer. There's no words that can make sense of it. And she said, I feared and hated. I might, and it stops. So Greg, have you ever given the assignment to finish her speech? What comes next?
I equated that to a different Monty Python. It's where they're in the Holy Grail, the Castle of R.
We think sadly too closely. Went to Monty Python in this sad moment where the queen dies. Any sense on what she was about to say?
I think I have to read the book again. I just don't think that deep.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the most difficult books I've read.
Yeah.
And I, when you said this is his best work, I'm like, okay, prove it.
Yeah. And I think because it goes to a deeper level.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Way
Yeah.
deep.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is not normal.
Yeah.
So I read it before the class, I thought, but then I've had to reread it
Yeah.
because it's a whole different book.
Yeah.
It's a whole different book. I wish I had the class before, but it's okay.
Yeah.
I read it before now, so.
Well, the good news is you can reread, and we have all things posted on YouTube, so you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Orval, so she, I don't, her character evolves, and I guess that's to me that's really the biggest deal that I just don't understand that, where she was at the beginning, and then at the end of the first part,
Yes.
and then this person that she becomes at the end, which is Psyche. Can you help me a little bit?
Yeah, I'll try. There's like two developments happening.
Okay.
The one, and this is the fascinating thing, is the one where I think you could argue you're seeing on a natural human level of the person who, and you think this is the story, right? Like, how do you take your difficulties, your trials, your hard things, and how do you adapt and grow, and she gains power and strength and confidence and becomes the rightful ruler, and on one level it's like this overcoming. So she veils herself and she learns to fight, and she knows her father wanted a son, so she will take on the nature of a male, and there's all the gender conflict, but at the same time she's complaining life isn't right and life is not fair because of who the gods are. They treat us badly or ignore us, but they won't give an answer of why. Why the sister I love so much and would do anything for, why they let her be taken off. These silly religions, which are all just play acting, and they try to control us, or there's the philosophy, there's like all these inputs. And it's like we almost would say, we'd almost say it's a success story despite all the stuff that happens to her. But she comes out of it with a pretty negative view of the gods. And then something happens to her, which we're about to find out what, that makes her recant the whole thing. Because it's like now she ends up seeing on a metaphysical or spiritual level that allows her to see who she truly was, the brokenness of her loves and motivations, because she could see it in other people before. She could see it in her father.
Yeah.
She could see in her other sister. She could judge Bardia's wife, and she could judge the priest of Ungit, and she could see all of them as like, oh, they're not authentic. They're people who are really manipulating. They're people who aren't true. And then she gets this second view where she realized like, oh wait, neither was I. My sister acted the way she was because she felt like I'd abandoned her because of Fox and because of Istra being born. Oh, Bardia's wife actually isn't a bad person, and she sees me as the cruel one who's eating her husband up from the inside out. And she starts seeing all these pictures and then realizes that even her own love for her sister was maybe the most perverse one of all, which was presented as like this, what wouldn't you do for the person you loved? And you're like, well, no, that wasn't really for her. It was for self-centeredness. And so there's this picture that says, it's only through the work of the gods that we end up with the kind of understanding and love that we need and that we were made for. Which is, and again, the person that I heard talk about this book that said, oh yeah, this really should be what we do, said that he really thinks that this story was telling the principles of Lewis's four loves, but nobody quite got it because they got caught up in all the other parts of the story. So he writes the book, The Four Loves After It, that he says you can now like see them in tandem. That you see these kinds of self-serving, selfish loves that are in order to receive, not to give. So the question is, it challenges us, even as good Lutheran people who say, you know, we live for others, we live to show God's love, we live to, right, do things in the community. And it causes us to ask a really hard question. To what degree are we being formed and our souls remade? And to what point are we kind of like Orwell, who feel really good and proud of ourselves that we're the one that would go the extra mile, we're the one that do all these things for everybody else. And then when they don't go the way we think they are, it's like, the dang gods. We don't say gods because we're monotheists, but why did God do this, or why did he let that? And we see it as screwed up the plan because I had a pretty good one figured out. But he gives us this view from an end looking backwards on our lives that makes us wonder, what's really happening and why? The things that were the trials in the life were surely trials. But at the same time, there were these formative parts that were creating the psyche that comes in the very end. And where at first she blamed life, the gods, the fates, her father, her sister, the foreign countries. Everything else was bad except for our narrator, which is something we're not used to, right? We expect always we can believe our narrator to be omniscient and good and rightly perspected. And there are other writings where we find out like, oh wait, maybe we can't trust the narrator. And this is one of those stories.
She doesn't trust herself.
Yeah.
Yeah. She doesn't want to see herself either, or for others to really see her. Like in her rise for power, she removes the mirror that her father had in the hall and she covers her face. It's like she's choosing not to see herself. And it doesn't until later when she finally, but I think she's trying to figure out by writing the story of her life.
Yeah. But writing the story of her life, the first go was writing the story about the fault of the gods.
Yeah.
It isn't until she rewrites that it becomes really the story of her life and what God was doing. in her, and through them and through the story. Here's the part that challenges me in a book like this, and why I thought, oh, this would be really fun to do. Fun might be the wrong word. I think sometimes in the church, maybe especially in what we would call mainline traditional churches with infant baptism, there's this idea like you do the one initiation thing at the start, and if it's infant baptism, you don't even do it, your parents do it for you. And then it's like, ta-da, right? I'm done. I did it. I'm in. We're the good guys. There's other people who haven't done that. They're the bad guys. And now, I'm just doing the stuff Jesus would do. The things I think, well, of course, that's what good God-formed and shaped people, that's what we do. And I think we ended last time when I said, as a kid, the most terrifying passage for me always growing up was where, in the end, it talks about these people who cried out, Lord, Lord, get cast out. And he says, get away, I never knew you. I'm like, wait, what is that? How could they have never known him? They were calling Lord, Lord. But you have different writers throughout the history of the church. Augustine deals with this. Lewis deals with this. Others that says, you know what, there's the visible, and people who just say, hey, I'm on the team. But the question is, are we being remade? Are we being reshaped? Are we being formed? That in the end we say, oh, look at this. God was working in us all along, making us into the people that we were to become.
I don't know if you're still filming, but you have a low battery message.
Okay. The question is, if it's low, it should still be going, but it might take us right to the end.
I'm just worried.
It's not moving.
Oh, I got you.
Now we're good.
This idea that we are being formed and made in our lifetimes, and Lewis would even imply in some of his writings, it doesn't end with our lifetime. Right? Because what does the Fox say? Like, I only think I understand some of the words now. I still can't fully understand. And within the Great Divorce, there's this picture of, oh yeah, like we haven't even gotten to where God actually is. We're just like in the way outer parts, and we're so overwhelmed. But we're this idea, like even in afterlife, you're still journeying, because how could one just all of a sudden see and understand and absorb all of who God is? And so this book challenges us to think about how we are being formed and made, and our souls grown. I had a commencement speaker once who talked about the problem for so many Christians in America these days is, you know, this again, depending on your tradition, you're baptized and you accept Jesus, you say the sinner's prayer, and he says, we're all about saving souls, but no one's thinking about developing them and growing them and them being formed. And that's an interesting.
So you know, I always say, I'm like a Matthew kind of person. You know, I don't care if you believe the world was formed in 7 days, or I don't care if you believe what happens at the end. For me, love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself is a full-time job. I'm just slow, I guess. But what I'm thinking is that I have, in fact, always concentrated on the second part. Now, really, this book talks about the first part. What does it mean? What does it really mean to love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind? What does that mean?
Because what Lewis might say is if we don't get that part taken care of,
You can't really.
you have to
give.
question, like, what's the
Yeah.
authentic type of love that we're
Yes.
doing for other people?
Yes. Yes.
Great question.
Huh.
Great question.
Yeah.
Because the second part of that seems more concrete and easy to take care of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the assumption is, well, if I'm at least doing this, it must be leading to the other part.
Or, like you say, because, you know, I'm a Lutheran lifer, as we say back home. I just think it's all taken care of. But that's all, might not be true.
I'm just teaching a class. I'm not saying anything.
I know. I gotta think or do something. I don't know what.
There's an interesting parallel between the final statement here and the way some people, and these are these kinds of things, right? You read a dead author and you're like, oh, I wish I could sit down and talk with him about this. Because at the end of the book of Job has the storyline, first 2 chapters. His wife says, curse God and die. And then there's this long poetic section where it's Job and his 3 friends. His 3 friends are telling him, you messed up. Something's wrong. That's why God does this, because God's just. He's like, you're liars. God is unjust, because I know I'm in the right. I demand an answer. And then in chapter 38, God shows up in the whirlwind. And then God makes a speech for chapter 38, 39, and 40. And Bible scholars still debate what is the point of that speech. Because it could be interpreted lots of different ways, and some don't actually make God look that good. But some modern scholars have this existentialist reading where they say the words don't matter. It's that God shows up in the whirlwind. Because it's the actual overwhelming presence of God that causes Job in the end to say, I know I spoke and said all these things, but now I repent in dust and ashes, because I'd heard what you were like and now I see. And I repent in dust and ashes. So it's actually the very presence, the being of the God, that makes it somehow okay. Which almost feels like, right? If there's no answer, her words are the answer, and then the God showing up, and she's just overcome. And so there's a whole other topic that could be explored about this idea of divine presence and what that looks like.
You had mentioned the ending. As we in my class do sort of a micro-analysis, we look at that she's finally reached that the reutterance of her idea that there is no answer, that you yourself are the answer. And she goes on to say, before your face, using that face term, questions die away. And then the very next sentence is a question. It's almost like she's reached the moment and then she loses it again. And the way that this ends, she leads its only words to be let out in battle against other words. And then she starts again, long did I hate you, long did I fear you, which is almost a return to the complaint. It's like she's realized there is no answer, and then she starts the circle of the complaint again. And it's almost as if the God, when she cuts off, the God has said, enough. Again. And that's the end of her life. So, I mean,
it's almost like sparing her from speaking more.
Yes, yes. Because, as you say, this is a formation process that you don't reach that point where you've been enlightened. You suddenly understand.
Yeah.
You have that moment, but then reality gets in the way.
Yeah.
And she's saying only words to be let out, to battle against other words. Words is used 3 times in one sentence, and then in the next sentence she ceases having words. or at least words that she's able to write down.
Because it's not like, if you remember the fox, right? He's saying, hey, I've been here a while, I'm still trying to figure out. She transitions into the next phase where maybe she starts to gain more clarity than she can on this side. We have to go to church.
Figure out who God is.
And we have to have Holy Week.
Yeah.
Some of us have already done that.
Yeah.
And some of you can go like cook out. But
But it was good.
the power to think about as we do go through this week, right, is this ultimate picture of divine love that centers not just our biblical story, but Lewis would say, right, this is what is his transformation. There's myths all around the world that sound like the gospel story, but the gospel story is the historical event that gives echo to these stories being told in all times and all places. Because if there's one thing at the center of the universe that is true, is that a God who creates all is willing to die to show love, to bring all creation back to wholeness. And that is the story that we rehearse in the church calendar every year. Till in a week, we say the word we can't say, and then we say, He is risen. Let's pray. God, you are so good. We thank you for your love that we cannot even fully grasp. We thank you for the way that you challenge and stretch us as you continually remake us into the people that we were created to be. Help us in this week of Holy Week, that this story becomes ever new, ever more powerful in our lives, about your love for us, so that we may see you and know you as the resurrected Christ, and that love you have for us, we are then able to love others perfectly. Build up our souls, we pray, dear God, in Christ's name.
Amen.
Amen.